Surprise from mosquito, roach and flies. Pop makes all of them die. Don't bother with the long chat, Pop tell you why. Pop makes all of them die. To take care of my premises, I have to stand guard. Pop kill insects, small or large. When me use my yard, me no need nobody guard. Pop takes care of roach in a house and yard. Surprise from mosquito, roach and flies. Pop makes all of them die. Don't bother with the long chat, Pop tell you why. Get serious, get Bop.
Bop is exclusively distributed by Prime Distributors.
Welcome to For the Love of Money Talk Show. I'm your host Emilio Calmera, and we're here 98.1 Pearl FM radio. As discussed last week, we are doing the video feed and so forth via Skype. So I'm not actually in the studio. I'm actually doing this radio program via Skype, and so this is technology today, and as a precaution for COVID as well. It's kind of better for everyone as well to definitely go the technology route. This week has been very bittersweet, I would say. We had both the COVID situation that is spiking, is also spiking in Aruba as well, and so forth. So we really don't know, where what the future really would hold. And so the vaccine would be a ideal something, but of course, vaccine takes about between 2 to 3 years to really be tested and so forth. I know they want to speed it up, but you know what goes wrong. Anything that's done in haste always becomes a problem. You can definitely reach us on our Facebook page, SSM 98.1 Pearl FM. You can reach us on the app, which is one of the best choices, I believe. You could be on the road and still see us here in the studio. You can also reach us on the 98.1 website and also see us live in the studio. The good thing about the good thing about doing this thing via Skype is that I can show presentations. So today I'm also going to be continuing with a presentation as well. Interesting presentation today would be the money creation process, so how that works. So I'll be sharing my screen in just a bit. But before I do that, when I said bittersweet earlier, COVID was one aspect, but there was good news came out this week when it says that the Enterprise Support Project is given a virtual launch. And so this is St. Martin Trust Fund Enterprise Support Project was given a virtual launch on Tuesday with project partners coming together via online teleconferencing platform Zoom to celebrate its long-awaited inauguration. The Enterprise Support Project is a US $35 million relief program funded by the World Bank, administered by St. Martin Trust Fund. The project will collaborate with financial institutions to offer loans and grants to help micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. So if you haven't read this in the Daily Herald of the 12th of August, definitely do that. They have different loan schemes, but the maximum that can be applied for is 150,000 US dollars I'm seeing here. And part of it, you have one of the schemes that offers 65% grant and 35% loan. So imagine if you wanted 100,000 for your project, 65,000 of that would be a grant. You don't have to pay it back, and 35 would be a loan. So if you haven't already have your business plans in place or whatever, worked on your business plans, now is the time to do so. But because today is a tight schedule, I'll launch right into the presentation for now. Also, you can also, if you need help with business planning and so forth, you can always reach out to me. That's something that I also offer my services with. But nonetheless, let's get into direct into the presentation. So, because of lack of time, of course. Okay. give me a quick second here. Okay, so the presentation today is mainly will focus on the money creation process. Before I do that, I'm going to give a brief introductory to get into the swing of things. So D.L. Hughley is a comedian, and he says, the love of money is the root of all evil, but the lack of money is the root of all crime. And I like this other one that says, leaving your comfort zone is hard, staying broke is hard, pick your hard. Then another one says, the uncreative mind can spot the wrong answers, but it takes a very creative mind to spot the wrong questions. The questions has never been, do we have the money? The question has always been, do we have the resources? And that was by Jacques Fresco. And you'll see how this comes more clearer during my presentation. Now, if you look at how a thunderstorm actually forms, it starts off with something called a towering cumulus stage, and I'm going to show you the analogy just now why I'm presenting this. It starts off very small, hot air rises, condenses, and so forth, and that whole mechanism causes more and more energy to keep going upwards and upwards until the thunderstorm grows humongous and can cause a lot of catastrophes, even tornadoes within it and so forth. It can go up all up to the 40,000, above 40,000 feet. But as you can see, as it grows and grows, it starts to actually destroy itself. Because as it gets, the updrafts gets higher and higher, they cool off, and then they turn into downdrafts, and then downdrafts basically. So you have the updrafts, downdraft, and the downdraft is what actually in the end up destroying, in the mature stage, end up destroying the thunderstorm, and then it becomes a normal, almost like a normal cloud, so to speak. So in essence, nothing can grow forever. Okay, so there's natural growth and decay within the natural order of things. So that's the way it is in nature. However, we have a monetary system that doesn't want to decay. And so when it doesn't want to decay and it's artificially meant to stay on, it eventually will crash nonetheless. You cannot stop the inevitable. And this is the problem now we're seeing with the monetary system. It has gone to its full range, and now it's actually destroying itself. And the central banks and so forth are trying to save the system, but unfortunately, it's already reached its cap, and it has to basically be destroyed. That's just the way it is, and so that destruction will cause a number of problems. Let's do a short recap before I get into it. We said that money has evolved over the time. It was barter trade, and barter trade was very resilient but not efficient. It went to commodity money, which was the first evolutionary step. So commodity money can be seen as cattle, tobacco, sugar, grain, shell, metals, etc. Then we went on to symbolic money. So symbolic money represented the paper notes, but then the paper notes was actually backed by, in this case, gold or silver. And so the symbolic money, that's what they call it, symbolic, because it's actually symbolic, and that paper could be redeemed for gold or silver. Of course, that is no longer the case. So money today has evolved into credit money, which is the second evolutionary step, which measure of value is yet to be defined. So there's no defined measurement of what is credit. And someone was recommending that we should get a basket of goods, basket of commodities, and then back that commodity and back it by credit. However, that's not been done as yet. So credit money has no measure of value, so to speak. And then, of course, the third evolutionary step was credit clearing. And now we're going on to the fourth one, which is digital money and crypto currencies. So let's move on to that. We handled that last week. And we went on to ask what was money. And in the classic economic textbooks, it says that is a medium of exchange, or accepted as a medium of exchange, measure of value, store of value like silver and gold, universal account like inches, pounds, and so forth. Now, all these points are valid for commodity money only. However, money has since long evolved from being commodity, and this is part of the problem, because if back in the days, commodity money was a medium of exchange. It was also a measure of value because tobacco, cattle, or whatever in itself has value. It was also a store of value and so forth. But today, credit money doesn't have these aspects to it, but we're still treating it as if it does. And this is where the confusion comes into being. Now, the problems with these definitions are they are functional as well as conflicting definitions. And they also tell what money does, not what it is. Money in essence is actually an agreement to accept something. That something could be anything as a medium of exchange. Okay, so that is the essence of money. But the classic textbooks in economics mainly focus on functional, but they're also conflicting. Because if money is a medium of exchange, how can it be a store of value? Because then you have to then it's best to save it, not spend it. So these are conflicting functionalities. Now, in view of these conflicts, it seems doubtful whether countries that limit themselves to the use of just one form of money can expect all the functions of money to be adequately satisfied. And this is true because, for example, I have 3 different computers, and each of them one of them have Windows 10, Windows 7, and so forth. And there's certain times that I cannot do certain things in one of the computers where I can do it in the other, simply because one of them is a gaming computer which is beefed up and can do certain graphics or whatever. So I can look at a housing plan and design a housing plan in that computer, but I can't do it in the other computer. So you can see that different tools, similar with the aircraft. Winair is very much suited to fly to Sabre, but I won't try to fly Sabre with a Dash 8 as an example. It's a different tool. So it's the same thing with money. It's unbelievable that we actually just use one form of money when sometimes, just like how we need a different computer or different aircraft to do certain missions, it is the same thing with money. So why there's a monopoly on money, and there's a whole history of that, how that came into being, and that causes one of the problems, because we need to build an ecosystem that the monopolized money should not be the only money in existence. You have to decentralize it, and that's how, I guess, over time, crypto started coming out more and more. Now, the intended purpose of money was to alleviate barter, not to get rid of barter, but to alleviate it, to make it easy, to make it less cumbersome, via an agreed upon temporary placeholder of value that is transferable. And so that agreed upon is very important because nowadays the community back in the days agreed upon a medium. Some was shell, some accepted tobacco and so forth. Now is a monopoly. So basically they tell us this currency you have to use, and if you don't use it, any other is illegal. So you can see there they became a monopoly on the money system. Now, what does should money represent? I said that Thomas Edison said it the best. He said that 2 ingredients, humanity and the soil, are the only 2 basics needed for determining the supply of money in the economy. It is the productive value of the actual citizen capable of working that is vital. And we must always remember that only labor can make things happen, regardless of the amount of automation involved. And it also said that labor existed long before money was ever invented. And money must never replace labor. Labor must always remain foremost and predominant over money. Labor is the reason money was invented. It's so sad that a lot of our leaders and people who are supposed to guide the country doesn't understand this, and this is stuff from way before I was born. And you can see when we deviated from these principles is what caused a lot of problems. You're going to see that in a bit. Now, the purpose of money is to transfer the value of labor and its related services and products about in the economy. If you remove labor, there will be nothing left for money to do. If the higher wage is not placed into the economy, no money to purchase the higher wage product will exist in the economy. And this is so true. And you're going to see in some charts later how that is really playing out. Now, this is something I created called the life atom model. And you can see why it's so important. We have time as the atom. So time is the neutral, is the middle point. And then you have health, financial planning and development, family, and spirituality as atoms and protons, so to speak. And you can see that nothing exists without time. But the problem is, if you dedicate too much of time to one of the atoms, let's say in this case financial planning and development, all the other atoms are going to be in jeopardy. Spirituality, you don't have time to spend nurturing spirituality, time with your family, nurturing health, eating well, taking vacations and so forth. And so you become unbalanced, and we know an unbalanced atom is very unstable. So you can see also the theme that says time is money is also very important. And the problem you're having now is that because of the cost of living and inflation is rising tremendously, people are having to spend more time trying to earn money, and therefore all other aspects of their lives becomes in jeopardy. And this is a very big problem that I've seen in many societies. Now, wealth is a measure Wealth is measured in time, not money. Time is money, by the way. The definition of wealth is the number of days you can survive without physically working and maintain your standard of living. So that's the definition of wealth, or the definition of wealth that I gravitate towards. Now let's look into some charts and some trends. Now, gross domestic product is something that is used a lot. I find it not a very good measure for a number of reasons, but nonetheless, this is the framework that the IMF and so forth love to talk about, so let's use it. Now, nominal GDP is the market value of goods and services produced in an economy, and is unadjusted for inflation, so it's not adjusted for inflation. That's what they call it, nominal. And then you might hear the term called real GDP. So real GDP is actually nominal GDP adjusted for inflation. So the price level changes to reflect changes in real output from year to year. So real GDP adjusts nominal GDP for the cost of living. Now, if real GDP is not specifically mentioned, then of course nominal GDP is assumed. Now let's look at this chart. This chart looks at real gross domestic product in the United States as well as gross domestic product. So in this case, it looks at nominal GDP versus real GDP. Now, real GDP is actually the blue line. If you look at the blue line going here, and nominal GDP is the red line. And this is very important because, as you can see in the past, the nominal GDP was below the real GDP line. And I'm going to explain what that is. And then over time, it switched. You see now that the nominal GDP line, right, is above the real GDP line. And I'm going to explain that now with this following statement. Now, an increase in GDP does not necessarily mean a nation has produced more output. It must be specified whether the GDP in question is nominal or real. So an increase in nominal GDP may just mean prices have increased, while an increase in real GDP definitely means output has increased. So in other words, if you see a growth in real GDP, it means that you actually produce more. So your output was more, so to speak, and nominal GDP does not necessarily mean that's the case. It just might mean that the prices went up, but you really didn't sell more products and services. You just increased the price. Now, if you can also sell more product and services while keeping the price constant, and then of course the output of GDP, or real GDP, would be higher. Now, so go back to this chart. If the real gross domestic product in the past was higher than the trend line of the nominal GDP, it means that output and cost of living was very low back in those days. You can see the switch over now happening around 2012, a little lower than 2012, and you can see now that the nominal GDP is higher than the real GDP. That means that prices are rising and not necessarily output of products and services. And if prices are rising higher and we're not producing more and more, that's problematic. And how that's coming into being, you will see, that has to do with too much money is being created in society and not necessarily more output. And of course, if more money is chasing fewer and fewer or relatively fewer output, automatically the price will go up. Now you can also see it with this particular chart. I showed this chart the last time as well. You saw that the blue line represents industrial production, the industrial production index. And you can see the red line represents the M3 money supply. So that's a classification of the money in society, which includes physical money as well as the bank deposit money and saving deposits and so forth. This was actually below, the red line was actually below the blue, meaning that there was not a lot of money supply in the economy relative to goods and services. There was always more goods and services prior to the 1980s or whatever. So therefore, you didn't have the issue with cost of living. Persons could have bought a house back in those days for, like, let's say, like $20,000, $30,000. That same house today is probably in the $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, and sometimes over $1 million US. And you can see that switch over happening around the 1980s and so forth. And you can see that the money supply has gone exponential now, while the industrial production index has kind of dipped, and also in the last, in 2020 now, you see actually is falling. So here you see that the production aspect is actually lowered, much lower as than the exponential growing money supply. And of course, if money supply is growing faster than the production, you always gonna get a cost of living going up. Now let's do a money creation exercise. And before I do this, I must say though that a lot of people are going to get lost in this one, so I recommend that you watch it over and over again. And don't be embarrassed if you don't understand it, because one of the greatest economists said, the process by which banks create money is so simple that the mind is repelled. And this was said by John Kenneth Galbraith. More than 97% of all the money in the economy exists as bank deposits, and banks create these deposits simply by making loans, and you'll see that now in this exercise. The money creation mystery. All the perplexities, confusions, and distresses in America arise not from defects in the Constitution or Confederation, not from want of honor or virtue, as much as the downright ignorance of the nature of coin, credit, and circulation. And we're going to see now why these statements and such statements have been made in the past as well. In the last program, I also mentioned that money and credit equals total spending. And money and credit, even though money and credit can be spent, credit is very different than physical money. Okay, the bulk of the money supply is not actually physical money; it's actually credit. Okay, and then you will see how this credit comes about into the economy. Let's take it home a bit. If you look at the chart from the central bank, if you look at the monetary union, meaning Curacao and St. Martin together, if you look at the money supply, which is M2 in this case, and M2, the total amounts on the top here, the 8 point, this is the millions, this is in millions NAF. So you can look at the amounts on the top. The amount on the top is actually consisting of M1 money supply, which is this amount, and this amount consists of everything below here. If you add up these, it comes back to the ones on top. And then NAIR money. So NAIR money in this case is time deposit and savings. So if you add the total M2 supply, M2 consists of M1, the M1 money plus the NAIR money below here. So in total, this is the total money supply into the economy. However, if you look at how much of that is actually coins and notes with the public, you can see that in January 2020, out of the 8657.5 millions NAF, only 371.6 in January was actually physical coins and notes. Okay, same thing for February and so forth. So what I did, I extracted the relevant information that I want to show you in another spreadsheet, and this is the result you will see here. So you can see that the money supply M2 is on the top. I extracted only the coins and notes out of this money supply with the public, and you can see that for January 2020, only 4.29% out of the total money supply was actually physical currency. For February, it was 4.31%. March was 4.31 as well. April 4.45%, and in May 2020 was 4.49%. So out of the total, money supply for those months, only less than 5% was actually physical currency, physical in terms of coins, notes, and so forth. The rest was actually bank deposits and other forms of money, digital money, and so forth. So very few physical and coin money exists. And this will baffle you. And some people, that's why some people said banks reshuffle existing money in terms of physical money. That's not true. Okay, there's very little physical money into the economy. That's one. This information was actually taken from the Central Bank of Curacao and St. Martin on the document called Note Economic Development St. Martin, July 2020. So you can actually go look at it for yourself. And you can see that America have a similar situation. In this chart, you see that the blue line represents physical currency, so only a small of it is physical. The red line is M2. So if you look at our M2 compared to that as well, you can see that M2 is much more higher than that physical currency aspect. So in America, most countries have the same thing. We are no different as well. So that's why when people ask me, isn't savings account lent out? That's not true, because most savings accounts are still transaction accounts in which the money is readily available to the depositor, at least in a commercial bank point of view. If it's available to the depositor, it cannot have been lent to someone else without duplicating the funds. So the notion that money has to be there before it can be borrowed is based on the old commodity theory of money. And indeed, when money was based on commodity, that was true. With credit money, that's no longer the case. And you can also see it in something called the Modern Mechanics booklet from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. A snapshot of the booklet on page number 30, I think it was page number 6, says that if business is active, the bank with excess reserve probably will have the opportunities to loan out the excess reserves, right? And of course, they do not really pay out loan from the money they receive as deposits. If they did this, no additional money would be created. And if you go back to the chart I showed you a while ago, indeed, if all the physical money was lent out, then why is there more money above the physical money? So here what they're saying then, of course, that they do not really pay out loan from the money they receive as deposits. If they did this, no additional money would be created. What they do when they make loans is to accept promissory notes in exchange for credits to the borrower's transaction accounts. So loan or assets and deposit liabilities both rise by the loan amount. Reserves are unchanged by the loan transactions, but deposit credits constitute new additions to the total deposits of the banking system. Might seem like Chinese, so we're going to get into an example now. Okay, so example number 1. Someone comes into the bank and deposits. So this is a deposit account here. You deposit $100 onto account. So, and then at the same time, it's double bookkeeping entry. So they have to be a debit and a credit. So in this case, the bank debited the cash side and credited the person deposit account. So 100, 100. So both sides of the balance sheet is balanced. You see, so both of them is balanced on each side. Phase number 2 is the reserve requirement. So the central bank have a reserve requirement, and let's say this reserve requirement is 10%, meaning that for every deposit that is, so they will look on the right side to see what the deposits are. So this side of the balance sheet here, and they will say for each for the total amount of deposits, I have to keep 10% of that in reserve. So what we would do now, from the $100 in cash, we would reserve 10, and this have to go by central bank for holding purposes to keep as a reserve. The remaining cash now of 90 we have there, so, and we still back to the 100 balance on both sides. Now someone decides to come for a loan by this particular commercial bank, and they ask for a loan of $50. So let's see what the balance sheet will look like after this transaction. We see that the cash still is 90. Okay, the reserves in this case is still 10 for the time being. And then what happens now, you see that a loan asset was created in the books for 50. At the same time, when they debit the loan asset for 50, they also credit this person's, I call it person number 2, account, his current account by the bank, a deposit account, for 50. So you can see the debit and the credit happens here. But there's no cash, no cash has moved. Because if you go back to the last slide, you realize the last slide also had cash 90 and reserves 10. So as soon as the loan creation process was done, all we see was a loan asset was created for 50 and a deposit account for 50. All other things remain the same. Now at this point in time, you need to understand that there's only physical money of 100 still. Okay, that was the original deposit. But the 50 here is actually credit money. And this, remember we told you earlier that physical money plus credit equals total spending. So in other words, you've seen that not only 100 is in the money supply and physical money, we also have now credit money came about additional 50, so the balance sheet went to 150 on both sides. So the money supply has went from 100 to 150, but from that 50 of it is credit and 100 is physical money, and we are balanced on both sides. Now to abide by central bank ruling, we have to look at what the 150 here in terms of deposits is, and we have to reserve 10% of that 150, which is 15, so we're short of reserves here. So the next slide, we're going to handle that. In the next slide, what we're going to do, we're going to deduct the extra $5 from the cash, put it into the reserve to maintain the reserve requirement, and then we still balance at 150. So this is a scenario now. Okay, let's move on now. Somebody else came to borrow money by the same commercial bank, and now we have a situation where loan asset number 1, we have loan asset number 2, because this person came to borrow $80. So we have a balance on this side of 230. Deposit 100, because this person still didn't take off any money from his account. which was the physical dollars, by the way. This person got the loan, but he still didn't spend it as yet, so it's still sitting on his account. And now the new loan is $80. So this is the third person that borrowed money. So you can see that debit 80 on the left side, credit 80 on the right side. Bam, we balance on both sides now. Now the question is, how much money is there in this particular bank? And the answer is 230. Okay, and from that 230, 100 is physical money, 50 is credit, and another 80 that we just created is credit. So these 250 and 80 is actually credit money, and the total supply of the money is 230. And that's why you see that now we have credit. Now the total amount of credit is actually higher than the physical money, and that's how you have the situation where physical money is actually very small representative of the total money supply. And now we have to look at the end of the day. We look at, okay, 230. We have to make sure that we have 10% of this 230 in reserve, okay, and that would be 23. So then we have to adjust our reserves here from the cash. So we have to, in the next slide, we will do that. So in the next slide, we adjusted our reserve, and we see that the reserve now is 23 to maintain the reserve requirement by the central bank, which is 10% of the deposits, okay. And then we have cash dropped to 77, and now reserves is 23. These two added up is still the same 100 physical money that represents the first depositor, and two loans for 1580, and also the deposit account on both sides is also money. So loans equals money, okay. In this case, credit money. Now, let's say let's say the first depositor guy decides to withdraw $77 from his account. What's going to happen here now? He's going to go to the bank and physically withdraw cash. Okay, so that's the only way you can get cash out of the banking system. You have to physically go in and withdraw the cash. Otherwise, you just do deposits back and forth with your Maestro, checks, and so forth without any cash moving. But if you want to take out your credit money in cash form, or your deposit money in cash form, you have to physically go to the bank to withdraw it. In this case, the bank has 77, and the person wanted 77 from his account. So of course, when he takes off the 77, 100 less 77 is 23. The bank cash now is completely gone because that was the last 77 that was taken out from this depositor. The reserves is 23 now for now. We have to adjust that in a bit. 50 remains, 80 remains, but now the balance is 150 on the left side, but also 153 on the right side because of the person withdrawing his funds over here. So now we look at the reserve requirement, and we know that, let me go back a sec, we know that 10% of 153 is 15.3. We have to have that in reserves. So we have too much reserves here. So then we can take back some of the excess reserve and put it in cash and leave what the central bank requires over here. So that's what we're going to do in the next slide. We have cash now become 7.7, reserves 15.3, loan asset is 50 still, loan asset is 80 still, 153 on both sides, deposit is 23, 50, 80, 153. So the money supply dropped down to 153, and so there you have it. Now let's look at how a mortgage bank such as Postpaid Bank, and even not a bank but a lending institution like Island Finance would operate. You see the totally difference now in the way this is set up. So now we have somebody came in, and this time is a savings account. He put on $100 onto the account, and of course now cash goes to the left in the bank's books, and the liability, which is the savings account from this person, goes on the books of the bank. And no reserves at this time. We're going to do that in the next slide, and we have a balance of 100 on both sides. This is very simplistic, but just to give you the gist of the idea. Now, so we do the reserve requirement. 10% is isolated, which is a 10% of 100, and 90 stays in cash and 10 in reserves. That goes by the central bank. Now, somebody wants a loan of in this case, a loan of 50 by the savings bank. In this case, let's call it Postpaid Bank. As you can see, cash dropped to 40, which was 100, which was a 90 a while ago. Reserves remain at 10, and the loan asset from the savings mortgage bank goes to 50. But what do you see here? There's no 50 on the other side, because when the Postpaid Bank and so forth, or in this case also a lending institution like Island Finance give you money, they give you a check, you have to go to the another bank, not even their bank, but let's say wherever they have the money, wherever they have the bank accounts. In this case, you usually have the bank accounts by different banks, like by Web, RBC, and so forth. They give you a check, you go to that bank, and you withdraw the money that they lent you, so the cash goes down from their bank. The reserve stays at 10, and the loan asset stays at 50. So no new money here is created. So in here, in essence, existing money is being reshuffled. So you see in a savings and mortgage bank, indeed, existing money gets reshuffled. A commercial bank can actually create new money without reshuffling existing money. That's the power that a commercial bank has. You can see here in this case, it remains 100. It did not move. In the other example I showed you, the first thing that they do when the person got a loan, you notice that a loan asset came here and a deposit account came on the right side, and then you saw the total balance went up by 50, which came to a total of 150. In this case, the money supply did not grow by 50. It actually went down because cash went down and the loan asset went up from the savings bank. Totally different. Now let's say now the same savings bank wanted to lend somebody money as well. In this case, they wanted to lend $80 out. You will see that becomes a problem here right now, because they're actually reshuffling existing money. If they want to do a loan asset to a borrower 2, you will see they would have a problem, because to get this thing to balance, they would have to have negative 40 cash, which is not possible. Okay, it's not really possible in this scenario. So therefore, they cannot lend out $80. The max they will be able to lend out is $40. Okay, and so I'll correct this now in the next slide. In this case, the cash would have to go to 0, reserves 10, loan asset number 1 is 50, loan asset number 2 is 40, we're back to the 100, savings account 100, and you can see we're back to 100 again. So you have 2 loans on the books of the mortgage bank. Money supply is still 100, never increase more than 100, because indeed here they're reshuffling existing money. And this is the concept you have to understand. There's 2 different scenarios. Commercial banks can reshuffle, and they can also create entirely new money. And most money are created by commercial banks through loans. And I just showed you a while ago that process. And if you didn't understand it, don't feel too bad, because like people, the economist said, the money creation process is so simple, the mind is repelled. So it's something you have to look at it over and over again to kind of grasp it. You can see again, so I showed you again that the physical money is only a small portion of the total money supply. In this case, the red line. Now also, if you compare that red line with for example, the total debt in America, you can see that they have a red line, which is a debt. This is the national income. Now, national income is what is used to repay debt. So it's almost impossible for this blue to ever repay the red. Okay, so that's impossible. And also, if you look at the red line, doesn't it have a similarity with this money M2 line from America? So you can see the more debt in terms of bank deposits there is, so to speak, the more debt there is in society as well. So debt and money today is actually related. It's actually the same thing. And you can see that in this chart. Now you're also seeing a big problem where the real GDP per capita is actually growing, while the real median weekly earnings of full-time workers is actually not growing by that much. It's actually flat. Okay, so the output is actually growing, and this has to do mainly with also technology as a point of reference. And so technology is also replacing labor. So that's why you can see that, you know, real median weekly earnings is actually flat, kind of flat line. Also, you can see it in this chart that in the past, both the productivity and hourly compensation was growing together. So the more productive you were, the more hourly compensation you would get. After 1973, you see that there was a shift. The productivity kept growing because of course, labor was replaced now with machines and automation and so forth. And so productivity kept growing and growing, while hourly compensation veered off and went flatline. And that has to do with, of course, less and less people working, and of course, also reduced wages as well. And now we're also talking about, is growth possible, or will it stabilize? And most people will say, if you look at the developing countries, most growth is stabilized. There's not much growth can be done. Also, a lot of persons are far in debt, consumers are far in debt, so they can't really buy more things. Now they will say, okay, let's look at the developing countries like Africa and so forth to actually get more growth. But if you look at the debt, if you look at the blue line representing developed markets debt, but look at also the emerging markets, which is like Africa and so forth, their debt is also skyrocketing. So growth now can be a problem because you cannot grow. How can you grow an economy when persons and countries are so far in debt? It's almost impossible, right? So you can see that we talk about we have to grow the economy, and growth is something that is used loosely. Is that really possible to grow? You know what I mean? And then they're not looking at also at the environmental impact as well. Also, you've seen an issue with the velocity of money. The velocity of money is actually the heartbeat of the economy. As you can see in the past, the velocity of money fluctuated on an average of 1.8. The ratio was 1.8, and going up and down and so forth. And then it started to go up after the 1990s, I guess, with the bubble. And at some point, it started inwards, and it even below historical precedents. It's all the way down to close to 1.4 and trending downwards. This is a big problem. The velocity of money actually tells you how much times money changes hand. The more money changes hands, it means there's more transactions. More transactions means more people are making money, more taxes will be paid, and so forth. If the velocity of money is dropping, it's like the heartbeat. If your heartbeat is dropping, it means the pressure on your veins is dropping. So you basically eventually will die if the heartbeat gets too low. The same is true with the velocity of money in society. It actually has been the lowest in history that we have ever seen it. Now, in closing, money will decide the fate of mankind. This was said by Jack Ruff. Given this statement, I think we better redesign money. We have to redesign the money system around community and resources, because this particular system that we are in right now is going to collapse, and it's not a matter of if, but when it will collapse. Now, I only have time to do one video, and so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to play the first video, and the first video is actually talking about Thomas Greco. He'll be explaining the debt-based money. So he'll kind of go into what I was saying in a bit, and in the next video I'll play next week because of time. And so I want you to watch the first video now. It's called Thomas Greco Explains the Debt Base of the Money System. And this will give you a better idea of what I just explained in a bit.
Now currently what we have is a massive inflation of currencies, not only in the U.S. but also around the world. And we've seen it happen over and over again. In my latest book, The End of Money and the Future of Civilization, I use the example of the Weimar Republic when they issued currency between 1921 and 1923. They were inflating the currency to such huge extent that people were taking the bills to the shops and wheelbarrows to get a loaf of bread. I think before the inflation began in 1921, the exchange rate between the mark and the dollar, I forget what it was, but say it was 500 to 1. And by the time the inflation ended, it was billions of marks to 1. And I have a picture of a 500 million mark note in my book, and I think in my collection I have a billion mark note. But typically this happens because you have this collusive arrangement between banks and governments. And this goes back to 1694, actually before that. But with the founding of the Bank of England in 1694, this sort of set the pattern for central banks to emerge in countries all around the world. And the basic agreement that was made between the financiers, William Patterson and his cohorts, and King William III, was that King William III would be given all the money he needed to fight his war against France without having to raise taxes on his subjects. And the Bank of England would provide that money based on government promises or government bonds, which put no value into the economy. On the bank's side, what they got was the privilege of lending banknotes into circulation at interest, and eventually they had a monopoly on the banknote issuance. Lending money into circulation, what it means is that a bank can create money. Now this is hard for people to believe, but that's the way it is. John Kenneth Galbraith, in his book money, whence it came, where it went. I have a quote from him in my book. He said, "The way in which money is created by banks is so simple that the mind is repelled." And I've seen that in my own experience when I try to explain this to people. They really just can't believe it. But it amounts to this. You go to the bank and you ask for a loan. And the bank says, "Okay, well, what collateral do you have?" You say, "Well, I own a farm." They say, "Okay, we'll give you a loan. We'll assess the value of your farm, and we'll give you a loan for half that amount." So what they do is they make two entries on their books. One entry is an asset entry, which is the mortgage note that you sign. That's an asset to the bank. And then they create an offsetting deposit to your account, which is a liability on the books of the bank. So by making two entries on their balance sheet, they've created money. That's why I say money is created on the basis of debt. The mortgage note is the basis for creating the money that's deposited to your accounts. Well, this is the inherent flaw in the monetary system, is that banks demand interest on these so-called loans, even though they haven't loaned you anything. The bank didn't give up anything. All they did was to assess your potential of repaying and back that up with real value of your farm. So if you fail to make the payments on your loan, they will confiscate your farm and offer it in the market to someone who has money to repay. So the banks win either way. If you pay back, they're earning interest on the make-believe loan that they made to you, and if you don't repay, they take your farm. Well, the inevitable outcome of this compound interest is sometime the system must collapse. When you have the compounding of interest over time, debt grows exponentially. That's the nature of compound interest. It's an exponential function. So as you go through time, your debt grows. If you weren't making any payments, let's say you borrowed money at 10%, in 1 year's time, if you borrowed $1, you would owe $1.10 at the end of a year. And at the end of 2 years, you would owe $1.21 because you're paying interest on the interest. And so with this compounding process, you end up with this hockey stick curve that Al Gore made famous, where the debt increases and ultimately it explodes. Now, it may take some time, but we've had more than 200 years of existence of our government in the United States, and for most of that period, we've had a government debt. I think Andrew Jackson was the last one to pay off the debt. And then with the Civil War, the debt began to escalate again. Government borrowing basically creates empty dollars, because if the government cannot sell its bonds on the open market to people who have surplus that they want to save, then the central bank will monetize that debt and create new money, even though there isn't any offsetting value of goods and services going to the market. And that's why we've had this recurrent bubble and bust phenomenon. The last cycle was the real estate bubble. We started out with the banks relaxing their normal due diligence in granting mortgages to buyers of real estate. They basically said, come one, come all. If you want to buy a house, or if you want to buy a retirement home or a second home or commercial real estate, we will make it possible for you to do that. We will give you a mortgage to do that. So by making money so easy, you had new buyers in the market bidding up the prices of real estate. So in some markets we had a doubling or tripling of house prices within a matter of 3 or 4 years. Of course, every bubble must come to an end, because once you run out of even unqualified borrowers, and you find that some of those borrowers are unable to maintain their payments, then they begin to default on their loans. Banks begin to foreclose, take the houses, put them on the market for sale, and you end up with a depression in the market. this is the opportunity that we have now to reinvent the money system. What the possibility is what I call direct credit clearing. Basically, when you think about it, money is just an exchange medium that we use to facilitate the exchange of goods and services. So I come to you and I say, I want to buy some of your consulting services for communications and videography. And so we agree on a price, and normally you would expect me to pay you in dollars or euros or some other currency, depending on where we happen to be. So we become dependent on these national currencies and never stop to think that there might be another way to mediate exchanges. You, of course, want to be able to take your payment and get what you want from somebody else in the economy. Maybe groceries at the grocery store or a new automobile at the auto dealers. What we can do instead is do a cashless trade. Goods and services buy other goods and services. Money is just an intermediary device. So we can eliminate the use of money. We can simply say, we'll form an association of buyers and sellers, and everybody is both a producer and a consumer. So within this association, instead of using money, we will simply offset our accounts receivable with our accounts payable, or we will keep track of debits and credits. When you sell something, your account will be credited. It goes up. When you buy something, your account will be debited. It goes down. And this is really what banks do anyway. We see very few transactions in actual cash, paper money. Most of the transactions are directly debited or credited to bank accounts. So if you're an employee for a company, your company might deposit your salary once a month to your account, and then you take your debit card or your checkbook and you go shopping. And what happens when you use your debit card is your account is debited. It goes down. So it's simply a matter of numbers in a computer. When you get paid, your number goes up. When you spend, your number goes down. Well, we can do the same thing outside of a bank. We can form an association of buyers and sellers and simply have our own system of accounts. We have the power to decide how we're going to transact business. We simply need to make sure that we have open records and adequate oversight so that the system cannot be gamed. You know, as I put it, I say that this dominant money system has within it a growth imperative. And this is because of the debt imperative. If debt is growing exponentially over time, it means that more and more debt must be created to put more and more money into circulation. Because at any given time, there's never enough money available to pay off the debt that's owed. So unless banks keep creating additional debt on which to base additional money, the system grinds to a halt. We have a depression. So they try to keep up with it by adding more and more debt to the economy. So you have all these players in the economy, individuals, businesses, corporations, trying to earn enough from the market in order to avoid defaulting on their debt. And in the process, of course, what do? We try to produce more stuff. We dig up more minerals. We cut more trees. We harvest more fish. And all of this degrades the environment, and the pressure to pay what you owe to the banks also destroys the social fabric. Everybody's trying to get enough money to avoid going bust. Because of this inherent interest factor that's in bank lending, you have this impossible situation. And so it has to end at some point. Either debts have to be forgiven, written off, or the game will continue by the process of inflation. The Federal Reserve is now monetizing large amounts of government debt, which puts empty dollars into the economy. But what people have to realize is that money has evolved over time. It used to be that commodities were money. and I'm talking about money as a medium of exchange. And so there were many different commodities that were used as exchange media over the years. In the American colonies, it was common to use tobacco or animal hides, bullets, sugar, various commodities that were in general demand that had a use. People would use these as an exchange medium. So even though I might not have any use for tobacco myself, I knew that other people wanted it, so I might accept it in payment for whatever it is that I had to sell, and knowing that
Yes, so you had to end that video right there. I hope it was informative still, and it kind of brought home the aspect that I was talking about earlier. More than likely, you might have to go over the video again on Facebook, because after this, the video will be stored on Facebook. So those who are basically listening but cannot see, it's best to check us out on Facebook. You will see the video, and you can see how that money creation process is a simplified example, but it gives you the gist of it. And the next video I had to play was actually the war on cash. You can see that right now, because of this whole debt system, there's a war on cash, and sooner or later you'll notice that we might not be able to use cash anymore. So that's going to be a problematic for a number of persons who don't like to use digital money as it is now. So these long bank lines or whatever would be a problem. It won't be the same problem in the future, because there is a war on cash. So in the next presentation that I gave, you will see clearly how this war on cash is going to be played out. And also, I'm going to touch base on another video that will be very interesting as well. So I wanted to thank you for listening. I hope it was a very informative program, and I'll see you next week again in another informative program. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Hey ma, how you doing? You busy?
I hear, just paying some bills, taking care of business, you know what it is?
I know, you're doing your online banking.
I don't have to stand in those long lines to pay bills. I can transfer when I want. I can check my account wherever. It's like the bank open 24/7. I even here checking the statement right now as we're talking. How's Miami?
Well, that's why I'm calling. I'm finishing up a few songs now, but I'm afraid that studio time might be more than I thought. And I was wondering if I could get some help with some funds, and I could pay you back as soon as I get back to St. Martin.
Let me check my account. How much you need?
I think 500 should be enough.
I can transfer it to you while online. Direct from me to you. No problem.
Great. Thank you so much, Ma. I'll get online with Bib now.
Alright, darling. You know who you're for? I need to know who you're for.
Contact Wib